So my name is Julie Pinkham. I'm the Executive Director for the M&A, and it's good to be here. And this brief discussion really is about what's called a Taft-Hartley pension plan. Has anybody ever heard of a Taft-Hartley pension plan? All right. Has anybody heard of a multi-employer pension plan? Yeah, a couple. All right. From me. All right. There you go. Something went in. They're more common in the building trades, United Auto Workers, United Steel Workers, traditionally predominantly male occupations from 50s, 60s on up tended to have defined benefit pension plans that were multi-employer plans. And it is, as it sort of describes in the wordage, multi-employer meaning more than one employer, right? So in that case, it would be, say you're looking at the steel industry, one XYZ steel company and, MOP steel company come together under one pension plan jointly with the steel workers to have a benefit that all of the workforce can have, even though there's more than one employer. See what I'm saying? So like, imagine yourselves like UMass and you coming, sitting in the same room with you and you have one benefit plan. That's what a multi-employer plan is, okay? There's only a couple of female-dominated professions in nursing, who have a multi-employer plan. And frankly, I think it's more because they drafted behind the male-dominated occupations during that time frame. So for example, the New York Nurses Association in the city of New York, this was common for everybody to have. So it was likewise just assumed that the nurses group would have it as well, so that they got it. They probably didn't realize till much later how relevant and important that was on hindsight. Minnesota Nurses Association also got it. Theirs was as a result of an arbitration dispute over discrimination on the pension, and so they put the nurses in. Other than that, there were no other nurses organization in the United States of America that had multi-employer pension plans. So why do we think that's important? All right, so particularly in predominantly female occupations, what's common is defined contribution pension plans. Does that sound familiar to you? It should, because you have one. All right. Now, a defined contribution plan is as that word describes. It defines what the contribution is going to be. It does not define what the benefit is going to be. So you and the employer work out under your contract or whatever how much money is going to go into the plan. You take responsibility for investing that money. And depending on how your investments go and depending on how the market is what then defines what your benefit will be at the end of your retirement. Now, you could have two nurses who have, say, 30 or 40-year careers, who put in very similar, if not the same amounts of money into that plan, invest in very similar ways. But let's say one nurse was at the culmination of her career in 2004. Market was way up, right? Things were looking good. She retires, she changes over her pension into an annuity plan, which is a guaranteed plan that then distributes your money annually basis, guaranteed. The other nurse, unfortunately, was due to retire in 2008. Market plummets, 30% loss. Massive, 1/3 of a lot of people's 401k plans lost up to 30% of their money. A lot of nurses both had similar lengths of career, both put in similar amounts of money, both put in similar investments. It's the way the market responded. The market will come back, but unfortunately for nurse B, she's at the crappy year, right? So what a lot of times happens is the nurses ends up staying and saying, I'm going to stay working until I can get that money to regrow again, and then when I feel more comfortable, I'll exit. I don't want to exit when I have 30% left in my 401k. I just don't feel comfortable. And that happened to a lot of our folks. We saw this coming a long time ago, and we said, you know what? The idea of a defined contribution plan assumes that there's going to be money placed in early in your career, and that over a long period of time, there's going to be what's a compounding effect, right? So you put small money in, and then it keeps making money, and that money keeps compounding, right? So there used to be a saying that every 7 years it should double. I think people have stopped saying that now, but nonetheless, there was this belief that when you leave it in and it invests, it will continue to make money and compound. The belief of a defined contribution plan is that the plan assumes that you're putting money in during your high earning years. But the basis of that assumption is between 20s to mid-20 to mid-40s. How do you think that works for women? What are you guys doing during those years?
Anything you can.
Having kids. And in many instances, reducing your hours in order to do child rearing and not putting as much money in. And you're not making the high-end salary because in many instances you're not either working much or you're not into a regular career pattern which you're elevating your salary structure. So it just, worked out that type of a style of plan, it's not that the plan's wrong, it just doesn't fit as well with us. So you could have, and I did see this at one point, a husband and wife working in an ICU, but fine contribution, right? She steps back during child rearing because she's having kids, right? And they both are working on parenting, but she actually reduces hours. They work in the same job, in the same ICU. What his money at the end of the time in 401k is very different from hers, right? But this isn't because she did anything wrong. It's just, right, different responsibilities. So we felt for women in particular, it's extremely important that we look at a defined benefit plan. And as it describes, it defines what your benefit is going to be. It doesn't necessarily define what your contribution is going to be. That's what the multi-employer plans that I've been talking about, those are defined benefit plans. There are also single employer defined benefit plans, and we had a number of hospitals that had it for many years. But the employers at that point in time were able to make money off the market to invest in that plan, and they weren't putting their own cash in. And the federal government decided that's not such a great idea because when some of these businesses are going out of business, we're left holding the bag and they have to insure the pension. And they didn't want that to happen anymore. So they said, we're going to expect that you have to fully fund these plans within a 5 to 7 year period, which means now they have to put real cash in regardless of what the market's doing. Well, once the employer knows that they have to put a lot of money in it on an annual basis, what do you think they wanted to do? We're done with the defined benefit plans. We just want defined contribution. We know how much money we're putting in. The employee takes the risk. And so they all started moving away rapidly from them. We thought, this is a recipe for disaster for us. We'll have all of our nurses in defined contribution plans. Hey there, no worries. Welcome. And from us, we're like, well, that means we'll have a lot of nurses, depending on how the market goes, that won't be exiting their workforce, right? Because if it's a down market, they're all going to stick around. If it's an up market, they'll go. It'll be herky-jerky all the way through, and they'll all get different types of pensions as a result, because not all. How many of you are experts in investing? I'm not. I don't even have time to really look at it and figure it all out. I got enough on my plate as it is. I didn't go to school to be an investor, right? And start talking about basis points and all this stuff. I'm like, that's not what I went to school for. So I don't want to necessarily be an investor. It's happy to put my money into a 401k in addition to, but I'd like to know after a long career in which I give my heart and soul and to the bedside that I would hope that at the end of it, I too am going to be able to go off with some degree of dignity in my retirement. So we pushed for a defined benefit plan, a multi-employer plan. At the time that we were doing it, of course, the market was crashing. So it was probably the worst time for me to try to do this, but we got it done. And how did we do it? Are you guys familiar with the Caritas Christi hospitals? Is that all familiar to me? St. Elizabeth's, Kearney Hospital, Good Samaritan, and Norwood Hospital, all owned by the Catholic Charities Group. The Catholic Charities Group is getting out of the business of healthcare. They had a lot of legacy pension plans under the religious organizations aren't subject to ERISA or federal government oversight. So those plans were underfunded and not subject to anybody's oversight. So there was a huge problem with potentially those plans all going under and 16,000 people losing pension benefits. So the Attorney General's office had a heightened alert about what was going on with these hospitals being sold. They were going to go from nonprofit hospitals to for-profit private sector. The Attorney General got involved and said, okay, well, one thing that we want is to make sure that these pension plans are stable. So we're going to make the hedge fund pony up $540 million. If you want to privatize these hospitals and buy them, then we want to know the pensions are going to be okay. We want $540 million to be part of the deal. And Cerebus and Stewart agreed to it. Our folks were at the table at the time. And we sat around saying, pension's a huge problem for us. We have this sweet spot moment right now where Cerebus is not going to cut this deal with Stewart unless the nurses' contracts are done. So those nurses sat at the table, didn't blink, and said, no contract without a Taft-Hartley pension fund. Now they screamed at them and they told them they would be in the Boston Globe front page for the closure of all the hospitals. It would be all their fault. They did everything. And as you guys know, sometimes you have to just not blink, right? They didn't blink. At the end of the day, they signed off on a deal that decided there would be a Taft-Hartley pension fund for nurses. And that's how this thing got started. all right? It took us another 2 years to really get it underway and do all the stuff that we had to do, but it now exists. And as a result, we've been going from table to table in the Steward hospitals and making sure that, because they kept buying other hospitals. So they went on to buy Morton Hospital, Holy Family Hospital, Merrimack Valley Hospital, Neshoba Hospital. So every hospital that they bought, we would go to the table and say, these nurses are going into the pension plan too. And that's what we did. So all of the nurses in the Steward that are M&A represented are now in this pension plan. Now, we negotiated that the employer is the one that puts the money in. The employer puts in 5% of the nurse's salary into the plan. And then the nurses, and this is the other piece about a Taft-Hartley that's relevant to you. It's called a Taft-Hartley because of the name of folks in the legislature that created a law that said when you create these plans with the unions, they have to be jointly governed. So it isn't some, amorphous group out here that governs it. You elect people and you are trustees and you sit at that table to govern this pension plan. You hire professionals. You don't have to figure out the investment. You hire professional investment firms, but you're a trustee and they get to come in and explain to you exactly what they're doing, why they're doing it, how much money they're making, and how the benefit structure will go. And you have a say in that and you constantly monitor it. So you don't have to worry whether the employer is doing it unilaterally and what their interests are because you're at the table and you have 1/2, 50-50 on the vote. They can't do anything or move anything without your acquiescence. So it has to be group effort here. And the law says anything that you do has to be in the best interest of the beneficiaries. The only way the employer can function is to make sure that they're doing so to the benefit of those folks who are in the pension plan, not for any other reason. So we think it's a good structure. If you leave one hospital within the Steward system and go to another hospital, you don't change your pension plan. You pick up right where you left off. So the more hospitals that go into it, the more freedom and flexibility you have should you over time choose to go into a different job or move geographically or whatever. You just keep your pension and keep moving it around and it keeps growing over time. So when I say the employer gets 5% of your salary, let me give you a quick, and I'll stop right after this just to give you, because I know it's a lot. But imagine that you're making $100,000 and the employer gets 5%. So therefore that is how much? 5,000, right? All right, you're all awake and haven't eaten yet. Good. So if the employee gets 5%, the formula benefit is 1.25. That's your monthly benefit, or otherwise known as 15% annually. That works out to, I think Wendy did this for me, I think it's $67 a month. Is that right? Right. So it sounds like $67 a month. What the hell is that going to do for anybody, right? Well, the point is that you earn that credit each year. So year one, $100,000, 5%, that's guaranteeing you that when you retire, you get $67 a month till you die. All right. Year two, get a raise, whatever, you're making $105,000 now. 5% of that. Now maybe it's $72. That credit's guaranteed on top of the 67, 2 years. Now the two of them combined is how much you're guaranteed every month till you die. And you can see year after year after year after year after year how that builds. You can tell every year exactly what you're guaranteed. You have, you know what I mean? That's very different too, right? In your defined contribution plan, you're watching it. Maybe you dial in on your fidelity like I do and go, 700, it lost 240 points like yesterday. I wonder what that means in terms of how much I lost, right? And you just look at your thing and go, oh, okay, that's where I stand today. This, you can figure out exactly each year it's how much credit you're going to be guaranteed for your retirement. And so if you've been around 10, 15, 20 years, you can add it up and you'll be able to tell when you go to retire, okay, I'm planning my retirement at whatever it is, 65. I know I'm going to have X amount of dollars coming out of here. At the same token, we tell them we want a defined contribution plan in addition to this, but just for money I want to put in, pre-tax, because you understand that goes in pre-tax, so you can lower your taxable income, right? So you put your own money in. That can be whatever. Whatever, you can take that money when you want too, which also happens, by the way, with the defined contribution. You're allowed to take the money. So we also see what happens is during a layoff or whatever, people go rob their retirement funds in order to make their mortgages. You never get to make that back up again. You're taking away from your retirement at that point. Under a defined benefit plan, no going to the bank. That is your money set aside by the employer for you when you retire. So we say have your defined contribution plan in addition to. So when you go to retire, you should have your Social Security, defined benefit, your 401k, you line it up and you can decide when you're ready to go and what your lifestyle should be, and you have control of that. And you should be able to know. And if the market plummets at 2008 and your 401k took a 30% hit, you could still go because you know that your Social Security and your defined benefit is enough for you to go, and you can let that 401k sit and let it regain the money back over the next 5 to 7 years, and you'll be okay. A lot more control, a lot more likely that people are going to be able to exit their careers without the herky-jerky, oh, the market dropped, now I'm in for another 5 years till it comes back. And we think that's good for everybody too, because at the end of a long career, you should be able to go and plan and enjoy those years. And also we think it's good because, you know, we want folks to be able to come in and get employed, right? The newer grads coming in can't get new jobs until people leave. They can't get full-time employment until people leave. Like, well, so people are hanging into jobs because they can't leave. That means the younger nurses can't get jobs. So it's kind of good for everybody as well. So let me stop there. That's a lot. There's always more to add, but that's a lot. And let me take any questions or thoughts that people have.
Is there if you vote this in, is there a initial time period? So some people used to have to work 5 years to get vested. And
yep. The vesting is 5 years. What we generally do is because, and the trustees vote on this and they've approved it for every one of the hospitals so far, we go ahead and take vesting credit for any years that you've worked, but it's without benefit. So in other words, how do I explain this? Generally, when you vest in a plan, you get vesting credit, and it takes 5 years to get fully vested in a plan for it to be yours. So you get usually partial vesting each year, maybe 20% each year to build up to 5 years at 100% of whatever's there. In our case, what we say is you've already probably worked 5 years, many of you. So therefore, we don't want you to have to wait to work because you've already been working. But we understand there hasn't been any contribution made on your behalf either. So you get vesting credit, so you don't have to revest. But on the other hand, you don't have any benefit there until the money's been put into on your behalf. We think that's helpful because there's a lot of nurses that are senior nurses that would be very close to retirement. And if we made them vest for another 5 years, there would be no benefit, even if it was only a small amount. Let's say you worked 3 years and you were going to get $150 for the rest of your life every month. I'd still want it, right? Why should I have to revest for 5 years if I work for 30, right? So we say give them the vesting so they get their $150. And we've always gotten approval through the trustees for that.
So if we vote, if the contract got agreed on this, how long does it take to get this up and running?
Well, the plan's already up and running, so it's whatever you negotiate. If you say, so we've had different examples, like Holy Family, the employer didn't want to do it in the first year, so I think January of the second year of the contract, they agreed they would then start putting in 5%. Once they put it in, the definition of when you become a participant is in the plan itself, which is the first July or January, I think it's on that sheet, once you're in. And then your contribution goes back to day one that you were a participant. So that's negotiated when you go in.
Is that, do you have to be considered a full-time employee to be vested, or is there a stipulation on the hours that you work a week?
We made the hours 840 a year because, yeah, most plans are 1,000. Yeah, I mean, most of your plans, like your defined contribution plans, the most common number that most plans have is 1,000. But we figured we'd try to lower it to 840 because there's a lot of folks that work per diem or minimum hours, and we would still want them to be, it might not be a ton of money, but we'd still want them to get the benefit of whatever they're going to get, right? So I think 840 works out to 2 8-hour
2 days a week.
2 days, yeah. Right.
Do you always start at 5, or do they try to negotiate less?
We tell them we won't accept anything less than 5 because we've had an actuarial do the numbers, and the plan is over 100% funded at this point, and we want to make sure that it's well funded for obvious reasons. If we want other employers to go in, we want them to know that the plan is stable and well funded. So we tell employers the bottom line is 5%. And I'm hoping over time what you can do if you want is if you went into contract negotiations again, you can control increasing your benefit without ever having a trustee vote on the formula, because you could just say we want 6% now. And once you get 6%, you're already controlling an increased benefit for your bargain unit. So it does allow the freedom of bargain units to push it, you know, if pension's an important item for you, you can go for more. If it's not important to somebody else, they could do something different. Even if you put it in your wages, you're going to positively affect it, right? If you take more money in your wages, then 5% of a higher salary is going to give you a bigger benefit, right? So you have a lot of ability to enhance your pension over time by whatever you're doing, whether it's directly to the pension or directly to the salary. Other...
Can you just go over again in your scenario, the first year, you said if you made $100,000, and your 5% would be $5,000, and it came out to $67 a month. And then the second year, you said it could be $72, but do you mean 67 plus 72?
Yes.
So it would.
So each year you could go across and say, here's the credit that I've earned for that year. Then in year 2, I earn this credit. They continually add up. Right. But you would have knowledge about what that benefit is, right? So if you drop your hours and you're half time and only making $50,000, that's going to not be as much built up in your credit either. Right.
Well, can we just talk to, when we talk about pension, we've talked about it like a last contract negotiations, we brought it up. A lot of seasoned nurses would say, why would I, which is a lot of us here, but we have a very diverse background and we want to but people who are maybe like 2 years from retirement or 5 or 10, they say, what's this going to do for me? So I think it's a great thing that a lot of us don't understand. I definitely don't, and every time I hear you talk, I understand a little more. But I think that's a big question we get from well,
so if you're very close to retirement, it's obvious that someone's going to say, well, this is not that's great benefit, but it's really not something that's going to personally affect me tremendously. So I've lost the opportunity for this thing. That's not true. Quite the opposite, actually. It may not be a lot of money, but it'll be far more valuable than it will be probably for most anybody else. And here's why. So let's say that you're only making $100,000, it never goes up, just for easy math, all right? And that you're 3 years out from retirement. So let's say it's $67 each year. What's 67 times 3? Somebody do the math for me. 210. All right, let's say it's 210. We don't even know if our math is right, but let's take 210. All right, roughly 210. Basically, what we're saying is 3 years, $5,000 each year, $15,000. You take $15,000 in the next 3 years and tell me that you're going to make $210 per month for the rest of your life. How likely do you think that's going to happen? You're a pretty good investor if it happened, right? Why is it it can do that? It can do that because you're pooled with a huge group of people. Right now, the plan has approximately $680 million in it. It can guarantee you that benefit because everybody's in the pool. So it can ride out the waves of back and forth over the investments to guarantee the benefit, right? So that's how it does it. That's the difference between a defined contribution and a defined benefit. If you just took your $15,000, one person, depending on how they invest it, maybe they make a decent amount of money. Another person goes conservative, not so much. So even though it's not a lot of money, let's say it's $210, that's not going to make you rich, right? I'm not saying for a minute that $210 per month is going to make you rich. But if somebody tells me for $15,000, I'm going to guarantee you $210 per month for the rest of your life, that's a good deal. Does that make sense to people? So for senior folks, I'm not saying you're going to make a lot of money off this, but I'm saying you are going to make more money off of this than you likely would have been had somebody given you $15,000. That's the thing we're trying to say. So it's still a good deal, I guess is the best way to put it.
For instance, I just want to say, my mom was a Hanneman nurse. They merged. She could have either went to St. Bede's or Memorial. She went to Memorial. She said, what's this pension thing going to do for me? I'm old. And then, guess what? She stayed working for another 15 years, which she could have retired, but my dad died. And let me tell you something, when that check came every month, she was like, oh, she was just living on that. Now, she had my father's pension, she had her 401k, but still, this pension added up more than you'd ever believe. So for us, you might not think, but it really is really important.
Right. There's things that are specific about this plan that are it's not a Cadillac plan. It's not this high-end plan. There's some single employer Cadillac plans out there that basically, this is why they're all dumping them, is because top best 5 years, top best 3 years. We're not idiots, right? If you're a nurse and you've worked part-time for 20 years and you know that the pension plan is going to be on the best 3 years, what are you going to do right before you retire? I'm working full-time and as many hours as I can because that's the number you're going to do it off of. But the reality is I didn't contribute anything for the last 30 years to that extent. Now that plan's going to subsidize it, which is why those plans, the employer's running away from them because they have to put in real dollars to cover that now and subsidize it. They don't want to. Our plan creates a formula, right? That's the formula benefit. You know what it is. It's employer paid. It is not your money. It is how much money we negotiated that the employer put in. What we say to people is take your own money, though, and put it in the 401k as well, because that should be your rainy day fund. This fund, we do not allow lump sum payouts, because I don't want anybody doing a run on the bank, right? Because that's how we make it so that people can get $210 per month, by making sure there's a big pool of money that can go up and down. No matter, that market has another 30% skid, I don't want trustees at a table saying we have to lower benefits. We want to be in a very solid position as nurses, right? So we don't lump sum payments. So I'm like, get your 401k. God forbid you get sick and you have, cancer or something, and you say, I have to take out big money, and that's what happens with the 401ks too. I mean, people, and I understand why. My brother and sister, during 2008, they lived down in South Carolina. They both lost their job the same year. It was devastating, right? Now they had a choice. They were going to lose their house while they tried to ride this out and get jobs back, or they had to go to their 401k. They pretty much, drained their 401k to make their mortgage payments, because it took them over a year for both of them to get back in employment. That money, and now they're looking at their retirement, and we have this conversation. My sister's like, oh my God, there's nothing we could have done. We didn't do anything wrong, but there's no way we're retiring when we wanted to. We'll have, she's going to work as long as she can work, and my brother's going to, it is what it is. Like, this is not how it should be.
I just have a question because somebody just asked.
Yeah.
A very important question. Does it take place of the 401k? No, it's separate.
Separate.
Right.
Now, the money that the employer is giving you that would be a match, they wouldn't do a match anymore, because we would be taking it. This is where.
Oh, so they're not doing the match to the 401k, we're giving that up.
No, yeah. So what you do is you negotiate with the employer. You say to the employer, right now what we do is 5%. The employer puts the 5% in. You don't put anything into the defined benefit plan, just the employer. So rather than you matching that, we say you put your own money in the 401k. All the employer money, 5% go into the DB plan. All right? Right now you have to match it in order to get it in. Does that make sense to folks?
Yeah.
Do you think that will make them agree to it more because they don't have to match, or no?
No, I think the fight over the pension for you is going to be, if the fight over the pension is not an easy fight, all right? If they can take no risk at the least amount of money, that's exactly where they'll go. But right now, probably not a whole lot more money than they're putting in now already because of your match setup. So it's not how much they're putting in that's really the issue. It's more of a control issue, like everything, right? It's like staffing, like everything. It's like wrestling control from them. It's like, yeah, you're going to have a pension plan and they're not going to be in control of it, right? That's different. They will have to sit at a table and you have equal vote. They don't like that. They don't like staffing either. They don't like a lot of things you have in your contract, but that is what it is, right? There comes a point in time when it's a valuable asset. It's a great recruitment and retention for nurses. I think it's an important issue in that regard. And one thing I said last time that remains true from my perspective is, and maybe it's more of a goal thing to me. I used to work at UMass eons ago, all right? But the reality is, in this city, where the density of M&A membership in healthcare is nearly 100%, with the exception of, I think, the VNA, we're gonna have to work on that, right? I look at it and I am kind of ticked off that UMass, both Memorial and University, have a defined benefit pension plan. Theirs is a single employer plan. It's not in the multi-employer, but nonetheless, they have a guaranteed benefit on their retirement. I don't think that the work that you do is any less valuable. So why is it on your retirement that it's going to be roulette time? I just don't, that kind of particularly in this city, I think in general it should be the case, but I think that there's a standard in this city now in terms of a benefit, and I don't think you should have a lesser standard than that. Right? I think you guys have fought hard, both groups, to bring the standards up in terms of staffing and other types of issues. I don't think this is any less important. If you work 30 or 40 years at St. Vincent's, I want you, and you should, retire with the same degree of dignity as somebody at UMass does.
Because UMass does both. They do have 401k with matching and pension. They have both.
I'm not, you may be right, I'm not aware of the
I
matching.
work there, I know. They have,
Yeah,
they're matching employee contributions to the 401k.
now their 401k
It
is,
was minimal. Their 401k match, very minimal at the end.
well, whatever the case, they still match
I
it.
mean,
There's, just to be clear, they're not in the multi-employer.
right.
They have a single employer defined benefit plan, which was, if, for those of you who recall, that when the university was public sector, they had one. And then they privatized it, Memorial had a private sector pension plan. So essentially when it flipped and we had to do legislation on how that would be handled so that folks could get 20 years in it, at the public sector to get their state pension, but also then they would go into the private sector pension. Now it's all the new code people all go into the private sector pension, which is a single employer pension plan. But it's still a DB plan. It's a defined benefit plan, which means they know exactly what their benefit will be on their retirement. And I think that's important. So that's kind of like what this issue is. It's not easy. I would not suggest you that it's a wham bam, you go to the table and you get it. I think what we're trying to say and talk about this issue is, in general, people don't seem to make this a big issue, right? But it will be a big issue when it's kind of late and you're trying to retire. And I think sometimes issues aren't sexy, but they're important. And I give 2 examples of that last time. One was, how many think successorship language is worth fighting over?
Definitely.
Right?
Definitely.
Does everybody know what successor language is? Talk about a non-sexy language. I can remember coming to, sometimes you talk organically about what's important to you in the bargaining unit and you want to put on the table, and that makes perfect sense. Other times organization would come in and say, hello, the world is changing, you might want to think about this issue. The issue was successorship says, if your institution is bought by another employer, that your bargaining unit and your contract remain intact. If you don't have it, your contract is up for grabs in renegotiations, right? Holy crap, right? I mean, I think you've been bought and sold 3 times now, right? So you can imagine after all the fights that you've had to get your standards up, if all of a sudden you're at ground zero again, right? But when you're not currently being bought and somebody comes in and says, this successorship language, it looks boring and legalistic, it's worth a huge fight over, right? And we had to do that with folks saying, you guys need to get this in everywhere because we think there's going to be massive consolidation in this industry. And folks fought for it, they got it, and I'm sure they thought, what the hell do we fight for that for? Bambo, next thing you know, everybody was being bought and sold. And contracts were intact.
Including St. Vincent, twice.
St. Vincent's twice. So this isn't, I mean, this is, you can understand this a little bit more than successorship, but it is something that's almost something that you have to look at as not necessarily an in-the-moment thing. Like staffing is in the moment, it's palpable why you need it, right? And other things are too, your wages, your hourly wage are in the moment. This takes a little bit more forward thinking and saying, you know, we at some point need to fight for this because we're not going to ever get it there if we don't fight for it now. So we're raising the issue with you and asking you to really think about this and it does positively impact people that are close. I'm not saying that it does, but it also is not a small fight, but it's a worthwhile fight in the long-term benefit of the bargaining unit. So educating, raising the issue, trying to answer questions, at the end of the day, your decision to make and what you do with it. But that's sort of it in a nutshell. Are there any other questions? This is kind of like a dry subject matter, I know, but.
Yeah, but you did great. Yes.
And nobody has any chest pain, right? Thank you, guys.